This racist, arrogant man wanted to expel a black woman from the plane but bitterly regretted it. On board a transatlantic flight from Paris to New York, a scene was brewing that would change the lives of all those who witnessed it. The plane, a luxurious Boeing 777, was a vessel of comfort and elegance, crowded with privileged passengers. Through the giant windows, the clouds stretched like a sea of white, making travelers feel like they were in another world. Inside, the atmosphere was cozy, punctuated by the murmurs of conversations, the delicate clinking of cutlery, and the professional smiles of the hostesses. The plane was on its way to New York, this mythical city where power, success, and wealth were measured by the height of skyscrapers that seemed to touch the sky itself. Among these passengers was Nadia Laurent, a black woman in her 40s, dressed in a sober but undeniably elegant suit. Her hair was neatly tied into a strict bun, a detail that betrayed the discipline and organization that reigned in her life. His features were fine, and his face, marked by years of struggle and success, expressed both serenity and determination. But what none of the passengers around her knew was that she was one of the most influential entrepreneurs in the technology sector, the founder of a successful and growing startup. Nadia started in a small apartment, where she spent sleepless nights coding, imagining solutions that would change the world. Today, she was the driving force behind a multi-million-dollar company, and one of the most respected figures in the industry. Yet here on this plane, she seemed to be a simple passenger, just another person among many. Sitting comfortably in her first-class seat, Nadia did not particularly attract attention. Her calm demeanor and her almost imperceptible presence in the tumult of the plane made her a silhouette among others. The lively conversations around her, the bursts of laughter, and the laughter of those who thought they were on top of the world did not disturb her. She observed, listened, lost herself in thought while being perfectly present. Her dignity was evident, but discreet, and she seemed to be able to adapt to any situation without ever being dominated. Yet, among all the passengers who were just anonymous faces in the crowd, there was one who noticed Nadia. Don Esteban Montague, a 55-year-old real estate tycoon, was not the type of man who was easily distracted. His gaze wandered around the cabin, and when he saw Nadia, something inside him tensed. It was as if an invisible veil had been lifted, and he had the impression of coming across an incongruous detail, an anomaly in this ordered and privileged world that he encountered every day. He immediately frowned, unable to take his eyes off the woman he was observing. She wasn't like the other passengers he saw. He was used to seeing sophisticated women, white elites, faces he considered his peers. But Nadia was not from that world. She was black.
A black woman, in first class.
A thought that disturbed him. His mind, conditioned by years of privilege and prejudice, didn't understand how someone like her could find themselves in a space he deemed exclusively reserved for people like him. He searched her face, unconsciously searching for a sign of familiarity or status that would justify his presence. But he found nothing. No visible signs of ostentatious wealth, of outward signs of power. Nadia had none of the image he had of people who belonged to this social class. Frustrated, he raised his eyebrows, his disdain showing in every line of his face. He didn't like it.
A black woman in first class?
It didn't make sense. Not under his gaze, not in his world. With a haughty smile, Don Esteban rose from his seat, scanning the cabin. He wasn't going to let this go. With a confident step, he walked towards the flight attendant, a young woman with a polite and attentive appearance. She hadn't noticed him at first, but as he approached her, his slightly inquisitive look made her nervous. "Excuse me," Don Esteban began coldly. "I think there was a mistake with the seat allocation. This lady," he said, pointing to Nadia, "should not be in first class. She should be moved to economy class. Those kind of people don't belong here." The flight attendant, a young woman visibly uncomfortable, turned her gaze to Nadia, then back to Don Esteban. She seemed to hesitate. Her gaze oscillated between the two, torn between her duty to enforce the rules and the silent recognition she had perceived in Nadia. But before she had the chance to respond, Don Esteban insisted, his voice becoming sharper.
"Don't waste time.
There is a more suitable place for her. She is not part of this world," he continued, as if those words could justify his unacceptable request.
Nadia's face betrayed no emotion.
She was used to these looks and these remarks. These little invisible attacks, these prejudices hidden behind polite smiles or well-chosen words. She had encountered them all during her career, in business meetings where her success seemed to be an exception to the rule, in events where her presence seemed to defy deeply held expectations. She knew it wasn't just an unfortunate seat allocation mistake. No, it was once again racism in disguise, ordinary and insidious discrimination that many allowed themselves to do because they thought they could get away with it without consequences. But Nadia was not going to let it happen. She knew she was more than what people thought of her. She knew that her place here in first class was not only justified by her money or her status as an entrepreneur, but also by the arduous path she had traveled to get there. Every condescending look, every disguised insult, every obstacle was a lesson learned, a step taken towards self-affirmation. Her body remained still, calm, anchored in a serenity that she had cultivated for years. She had learned not to let herself be carried away by impulsiveness, not to react to the first slight. His hands rested peacefully in his knees, but his mind was in turmoil. She thought about what was coming next, calculated every movement, every word. She knew that the situation would quickly go beyond a simple misunderstanding. It wasn't the first time a man like Don Esteban had thought he could impose his will on her, and she knew he wasn't going to get away with it without consequences. She stood up slowly. Every movement seemed deliberate, measured, as if she was completely in control of the situation. His eyes rested on Don Esteban. She didn't look down. She did not offer him this weakness. Her eyes were sharp, as if she were able to read the deepest thoughts of this man who believed that everything belonged to him, even the right to judge others based on their appearance. A heavy silence settled in the cabin, the murmurs gradually dissipating, as if all the passengers had instantly understood that something important was about to happen. Nadia looked Don Esteban in the eyes without looking away, a slight smile on her lips. She didn't feel the need to raise her voice, not yet. She had seen the panic in the flight attendant's eyes, the hesitation and discomfort in the young woman's gestures. But she knew the flight attendant hadn't yet chosen sides. The decision was now his. Then, in a soft but firm voice, Nadia replied, "I advise you to sit down, Mr. Montague. Not only do I have a right to be here, but I own part of this airline." The words, simple but heavy with meaning, fell through the air like shards of glass. The effect was immediate. Don Esteban stopped abruptly, his eyes wide, his jaw slightly tense. "What?" he stammered, unable to understand what he had just heard. Nadia smiled slightly, a barely perceptible smile, but one that seemed to say it all. She knew exactly what she was doing, and this small victory in the conversation was a gesture that betrayed the total control she exercised over the situation. Her gaze became more piercing, sharper, as she observed Don Esteban, as if he were just a naive child who had just discovered that he was not on top of the world as he thought he was. "I invested in this company years ago," she said, her voice growing more confident. "I'm one of its largest shareholders. And before you ask, no, I'm not moving." Don Esteban's eyes filled with confusion, with an almost comical surprise. His lips trembled, searching for a response that didn't come. The arrogant man who had taken the plane with the idea of imposing his will, of putting pressure on a simple passenger, was now destabilized, almost intimidated by this revelation. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning, and for a moment it seemed as if the air around him became thicker, heavier to breathe. He stood there, frozen, unable to understand how a black woman, a simple first-class passenger, could hold a power that he thought was reserved for him. Nadia, unfazed, sat back quietly in her seat. The flight attendant, seeing the situation turn into a confrontation that she could not ignore any longer, immediately turned to Don Esteban. She understood that her role here was now clear, that the game was up and that the arrogant man could no longer challenge the rules of the game. In a firm but respectful tone, she said, "I think you should return to your seat, Mr. Montague, before this becomes a problem for you." The agent's voice, usually so gentle and welcoming, now sounded like unquestioned authority. The tension in the cabin rose a notch, and all the passengers, who until then had remained passive, began to feel the weight of the injustice that had just been exposed. Red with shame, Don Esteban walked away grunting, his heavy footsteps echoing in the cabin. His dignity was bruised, his illusory supremacy shattered. The shame he felt was palpable, and he could no longer ignore the truth that had been revealed to him, the truth that reduced him to what he really was. A man like any other, not above anyone. The atmosphere in the cabin changed almost instantly. The murmurs began, shy at first, then more confident, until a form of tacit respect invaded the space. The passengers, previously distracted and indifferent, began to look at Nadia differently. There was no longer any doubt. She was a powerful person, and her position in first class was not only legitimate, but deserved. Some passengers exchanged looks of complicity, other nods of approval. Even the flight attendant, now more confident, smiled briefly before returning to her tasks. For the rest of the flight, Nadia immersed herself in her book, but she couldn't help but feel the furtive glances of the other passengers falling on her. Every time she looked up, she caught quiet murmurs, whispers exchanged between the seats. Curious looks, embarrassed smiles, and expressions of admiration mixed with surprise. She knew what they were thinking, or at least what they were imagining. The title of the article that they were probably creating in their heads was already written: Black Woman, Investor, with Questionable Status. But for Nadia, it was not about the image they had of her. No, she knew that it wasn't her money that gave her this right to be there, in that first class, on an equal footing with the others. It was his skill, his intelligence, and his hard work. His ability to invest where others were afraid to do so, to anticipate market curves, to seize opportunities where others saw risks. She was not just a shareholder. She was a woman who knew how to use her mind to rise to the height of her ambitions. But she also knew that this look she was given was not a first. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to demean her because of her skin color, to implant in her mind the idea that she was just one exception among many, an anomaly in a world of privilege. Her successes were always tinged with this little bitter taste, the one imposed on her by those who could not conceive that a black woman could occupy such a position, who still thought that success in this world was the exclusive domain of white men. But this time something was different. This time, she had found the opportunity to show this arrogant man what it cost to hastily judge someone he did not know. She was used to these moments when people, in their arrogance, tried to make her feel inferior. But this incident on the plane had offered him much more than just a personal victory. It had allowed him to respond to a past humiliation, a humiliation that dated back to too many years of effort to prove his worth to a world that was too often blind. This time, it was he who took the slap, and she was secretly happy about it. She hadn't just responded to an attack. She had proven to him that she could play this game with a finesse he would never have imagined. When the plane finally lands in New York, a feeling of calm comes over him. The flight was over, but Nadia knew that the last scene of this little confrontation would take place in a few minutes. As the other passengers stood up, eager to leave the plane, she waited patiently for the majority of them to get off. She had always preferred to avoid crowds, never to let herself be carried away by the urgency of others. And she wasn't wrong. The scene that would take place on the tarmac would be much more spectacular if she let the stage empty of its first crowd. As she headed toward the exit, she saw, through the window, a line of immaculate black limousines, gleaming in the afternoon sun, accompanied by a multitude of photographers armed with their cameras, ready to capture every move. The hustle and bustle on the tarmac contrasted with the tranquility of the plane cabin, and Nadia felt a smile appear on her lips. Don Esteban, who had followed her closely, stopped suddenly when he saw the scene unfolding before his eyes. His eyes widened with surprise, then confusion. He had thought that all this attention, all these limousines and these photographers, were for him. After all, wasn't he the accomplished businessman, the tycoon who thought the world revolved around him? But as the limousines got closer, he realized, too late, that he had made a big mistake. One of the photographers approached Nadia, a bright smile on his face, an almost admiring look. "Madame Laurent, congratulations on your partnership with the airline. You have dazzled everyone again."
The words resonated like a clap of thunder for Don Esteban, who froze, caught in a wave of shock.
He who had despised Nadia, treating her like just an ordinary passenger, was now confronted with a truth that he had not seen coming. Nadia Laurent was a person of influence, a powerful woman in the business world, and he had just underestimated her in the most cruel and public way possible. Don Esteban took a step back, his jaw clenched, his features distorted by the humiliation that overwhelmed him. He knew he couldn't escape this scene. There it was, the humiliation he had prepared for Nadia, turned against him. He had not simply been excluded from the circle of the powerful. He had just seen himself relegated to the role of spectator, that of a man who had judged without understanding, and who, in that precise moment, was only a shadow of himself.
Nadia, implacable and smiling, got into the limousine without even glancing at Don Esteban, savoring every moment of this sweet revenge.
She sat comfortably, feeling the power of the situation flowing through her, as the engine roared and the limousine took off. In that moment, Nadia knew the arrogant man had learned his lesson. He had believed that his position, his money, and his skin color put him above others. He had believed that he could reduce Nadia to a caricature of what he imagined of her, without measuring the consequences. But, as in a theatrical scene, he had come to understand too late the seriousness of his hasty judgments. He had treated Nadia like an outsider, like someone who didn't belong in his world, thinking that everything happened according to his rules. She had just proven to him, in the most public and devastating way possible, that he was deeply mistaken. And in this revelation, she had just destroyed not only her illusion of superiority, but also the arrogance that resulted from it.